All right, good morning, everyone. Let's try to start on time, and thank you for getting down the stairs in an efficient manner. I'm Karen Von Hippel, the director here at RUSI, and it is an enormous pleasure to welcome all of you here today for the first inaugural annual security lecture. We will now be doing these every year with a senior official from the security and law enforcement community in the UK to talk about pressing issues that matter. And this year's lecture is on police technology and data ethics. I know it's an issue many of you care about. As many of you know, the police department's deployment of new data analytics technology has been receiving significant public attention in recent months, and in particular, the focus has been on the Metropolitan Police's use of facial recognition technology cameras in London. And there was a legal challenge and a subsequent High Court judgment in South Wales, which ruled that the police's use of these technologies was lawful, but the police do still receive considerable criticism from privacy campaigners and legal activists about this, and they are arguing that new legislation is needed to regulate the police's use of new technologies, including biometrics and artificial intelligence. So these are the issues, the very thorny issues we will be discussing today in this event, and they will be considered first in the commissioner's remark and then in a panel discussion. Today's event also coincides with the launch of our RUSI report that I think most of you got when you walked in the door. It is our final report on data analytics and algorithms in policing, and it was commissioned by the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation, CDEI, and the director, Roger Taylor, is in the front. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank CDEI for their support and partnership for this report. It's been a great effort, a joint effort, and they're also sponsoring today's event, so thank you for that. The purpose, though, of our joint work, of RUSI and CDI's work together, is to recommend national guidelines for the use of algorithms in policing, and our hope is that such guidelines can provide the police with a clear framework to innovate with new technologies in a controlled way, while also respecting and giving the public reassurance that their rights and civil liberties will be respected. And I know it's a difficult balance that many of you fall on one side or the other in this debate. Obviously, we all want these new tools to help us become smarter, more effective, and save resources. So let me just say about today's event very quickly. We will organize it in three parts. First, we will hear public remarks from the commissioner, which will be about 30 minutes. And it's not about our report, actually. It's about her own issues in this space. That will be followed by a panel discussion with the commissioner, with Lord Evans, with Roger Taylor, and my colleague Sasha Babuta. And the commissioner will also participate in the panel discussion, and then we will have Q&A. So the first two sections, the commissioner's remarks and the panel discussion, are on the record and streamed. There are cameras in the back. And then when we go to the Q&A, it'll be off the record. So I'd ask all of you to respect that, please, and we'll have a much more interesting conversation. So very briefly, if I could just do quick bios for all of our key speakers. First, we will hear from Dame Cressida Dick, Commissioner of London's Metropolitan Police Service, which is the UK's largest police force, as most of you know. She is the first woman to take charge of the service and was selected in February 2017. She joined the MPS as a constable in 1983 and later transferred to Thames Valley Police before returning to the MPS as a commander in 2001. She has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the Queen's Police Medal for Distinguished Service, the Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 2015, and then she was promoted Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 2019. As part of our panel, we have Lord Evans over in the front row of Weardale. He's the chair of the Committee on Standards in Public Life and was appointed to this role in November 2018 for a 5-year term. He's recently completed a review into artificial intelligence and its impact on standards across the public sector, and we'll hear a bit more about his report later. As most of you know, Lord Evans previously served as Director General of the British Security Service, MI5, the UK's Domestic Security and Counterintelligence Service, from 2007 to 2013. In 2014, he was appointed a crossbench life peer, and critically, he's a RUSI Distinguished Fellow. He will be joined by Roger Taylor, who I pointed out earlier, the chair of the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation. Roger has worked as an entrepreneur, a regulator, an author, and a journalist, which I think is an interesting mix. He's argued for rebalancing control over data and information towards citizens and civil society. He's chair of Ofqual, the qualifications regulator, and a member of the advisory panel to Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation, and he's authored several books, as well as co-founded Dr. Foster, which uses public data to provide independent ratings of healthcare. And last but not least is my colleague Sasha Babuta, a research fellow here at RUSI in National Security Studies, where his research focuses on the use of emerging technologies for security purposes. He works in our organized crime and policing program. He focuses on police technology, surveillance policy, and the regulation of artificial intelligence, and researches transnational organized crime and counterterrorism. So without further ado, can I invite you up, Dame Cressida?
Well, thank you very much indeed. Last night I spoke to Tony. Tony is one of my sergeants. He works on our team that we call the Venice team. The Venice team have reduced moped-enabled crime in London from over 19,000 in 2017 to just over 4,000 in the last calendar year. And I asked Tony how. And he said, we've created a hostile environment for the people who use mopeds to rob. We've layered our tactics, and we've made the best use of the technology that we've got. So they've got high-powered motorbikes. They use DNA tagging spray. They have electronic pro spikes, which are spikes that go across the road to bring the vehicle to a safe halt without putting the officer at risk. They have automatic number plate recognition on the laptop in the car, so they can see when vehicles that they are interested in are pinging in their direction. You will probably, many of you know also that they are incredibly skilled drivers, some of them, and they use occasionally quite assertive pursuit tactics. They sometimes use the helicopter. They're supported by investigators who use CCTV, forensics, comms data to find conspirators, to find handlers, to get the best evidence for court. And as I was listening to him, I was reminded how far we have come. I started patrolling in 1983, as you've heard, just up the road from here. And I had, although I never qualified for it, an Austin 1100, a typewriter, no DNA, fingerprints, yes, and a card index system to work with. Using technology has clearly enabled us to be much more effective, much more efficient, to keep our staff safer, and to raise transparency, accountability, and standards, something I think is often overlooked. Convictions now are very, very much more reliable than they were in 1983 because of our use of technology. So I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you all at RUSI, and thank you to RUSI for inviting me to talk about modern policing and our use now of data and technology and in the future. And I'm going to speak a little bit about crime today, its scale, its volume, its complexity, the threat. I'm going to say something about the modern Met that I believe is getting fit for the future, and I'm going to talk about how technology is enabling human policing and why this needs your support. I hope you will come away from today with an appreciation that the Met is a force for good, one that you can trust, and one that is open to your scrutiny. that the volume and complexity of crime today means we can't stand still. We can't allow technology to advance while we are left behind. And an appreciation that well-governed, well-explained, proportionate use of technology by the police will reduce the likelihood of you, your family, your friends being harmed by crime. So, crime today and the challenges it presents to us. A decade ago, 17% of people owned a smartphone. Now that's somewhere up near 80%, and of course amongst the young, well over 95%. Simultaneously, the volume of data produced and stored by individuals has rocketed. The average London household has 10 data storage devices at least. It's not unusual for one device to contain 50,000 data items. In 2005, none of us in this room, I'm sure, will forget the dreadful events of 7/7. In those investigations, where over 50 people were killed, we had multiple crime scenes. We seized about 400 digital exhibits. In total, they had 4 terabytes of data. In 2018, in a single investigation led by the CT Command, at one single crime scene, we recovered 61 terabytes of data and over 36 terabytes from other scenes connected to the investigation. So that's a total of 97 terabytes in one far, far, far smaller investigation. If we were to download the data on a mobile phone, print it on pages, and lay those pages out, they would stretch from here to Canary Wharf and back, laid end to end, undoubtedly. Most crimes have a digital element. Indeed, a very high proportion now, people guess perhaps 50%, is now committed entirely online, to defraud, to harass, to sexually exploit, to blackmail, to undermine, to spy, to hack, to attack systems, organizations, reputations, infrastructure, states. And what I would call more common or garden crimes are frequently enabled digitally. Criminals use modern technologies to plan, communicate, conspire, groom, threaten, radicalize, move cash, move illicit goods, hide transactions. So, as I think in this room you will all be aware, it is very rare for any investigation now not to require ingestion and assessment of high volumes of digital and other forensic material from a wide variety of sources, including accessing personal data stored in a multiplicity of locations. In addition, criminals communicate across multiple encrypted platforms, often simultaneously, making identification and analysis of relevant content extremely challenging. How far we have come since 1983, how easy the TV shows make it all seem. The mountains of digital material that we are required to examine, and frequently to ask very complex questions of, such as, could this be relevant to the defense or undermine a prosecution, are perhaps the biggest contributor, in my view anyway, to increased demands on policing in the last few years. Add to this the so-called new crimes, not really new, but for these purposes, sexual exploitation online or modern human slavery, more international crime, more reporting of domestic violence and sexual offences, the changing threats from terrorism manifest so horribly in recent weeks in Streatham and at Fishmongers Hall. Add also in the last few years more serious violence, particularly amongst young people and often associated with drugs markets. All in all, UK policing has been dealing with greater complexity and volumes of crime. In addition, expectations have risen about our need to manage risk, to safeguard, to deal with non-crime issues such as mental health, to respond to antisocial behaviour, to police protest. Our standards are expected to be higher, and the range of harms we are supposed to prevent or investigate has been growing. Despite these rising demands and, until latterly, reduced resources, you may have seen that trust in police officers continues to rise. We are, according to the Ipsos Mori Veracity Index, not quite as highly trusted as nurses or doctors. I envy that. But so very, very, very much more than, you're all guessing, bankers, estate agents, journalists, just to name a couple, with no disrespect to anyone in the room. The Met aims to be the most trusted police service in the world. Of all of our operational challenges, some of which I've talked about a second ago, the need to bear down on violent crime in London in all its forms, to reduce prevalence and to bring more offenders to justice, is the Met's #1 priority. And we've made some real progress. Think of what Tony and the Venice team have achieved. We've made big reductions in the number of stabbings of those under 25. We've had far fewer acid attacks. We've had far fewer firearms discharged. But we are very far from complacent, and there's much, much more for us to do. So what are we doing? Well, human progress is made by replacing the older with the better. And I regard it as a huge privilege to be able to lead currently the world's most renowned police force in a top global city. A city that has embraced technology, a city that is a digital hub, a vibrant economic metropolis that delivers about 20% of the UK's tax revenue, and, as an aside, where the Met is its largest single employer. From tackling crime and countering terrorism to securing state visits and global summits, I'm incredibly proud of the men and women who are working tirelessly and compassionately, day in, day out, to make London safer. London's population is now growing, again, very fast. It's much bigger now, or getting bigger now, than New York. It's getting proportionately older. A higher proportion of the population are older, and a higher proportion of the population are younger, and that will increase. It's becoming ever more diverse. We have over 1 million commuters a day coming into the capital, 19 million tourists every year. And of course, in the last decade, there's been a very strong global role for London as a host city, particularly following the 2012 Olympics. So we've experienced a wonderful rise in public events. We have over 3,500 to police every year. Some of these are huge set-piece events, such as this year's Euro 2020 Football Championship, very recently the NATO Summit. London is thriving, but it has its challenges. Income inequality is higher in London than anywhere else in the UK. No one can be proud of our levels of child poverty. New Scotland Yard has a worldwide reputation for the standards we set in many, many areas of policing, including managing major events and incidents, policing protest, the use of our technology, such as CCTV, automatic number plate recognition, forensics, homicide and serious crime investigations, terrorism and security, community policing. We are noted for our restrained use of force and indeed intrusion. We apply both only when necessary and in a proportionate manner, according to the law, and incidentally in a manner I think Sir Robert Peel, our founder 190 years ago, would be very proud of. We're always seeking to learn, to adapt, to modernise. In the last 20 years, I would say we have become hugely more transparent, much more accountable, much more responsive, much more diverse. We've transformed the way we work with colleagues in the intelligence agencies and government, and we've led the way in many policing developments. But as I've said, the environment is now changing very rapidly, both online and on the streets, and there is much more to do. In the context of this rising and changing demand and complexity, the new growth in policing, with an extra 20,000 officers nationally over the next few years, is very welcome. For us, from a low of just over 29,500, not so long ago at all, we are growing steadily and well, and by March 2021, we'll have 33,000 officers. We aim to be an organisation that reflects London's diversity, and it's great to see every month 350 to 450 new officers of every kind of background coming in, making a visible change to the Met and on the streets of London. And this will help us in tackling violent crime and help us, I believe, in increasing the public's confidence in how we tackle it. An extra 6,000 officers at least in London will strongly support our efforts to suppress violence, to tackle robbery and burglary, to deal with the changing threats from terrorism and serious organised crime, and to discharge our duties as a national and international city police service, including, of course, as we've observed in the last year, increasing public order challenges. We have a strategy. I hesitate to talk about strategy because I know some people just go, oh God, how boring. And of course, then I thought, well, I'm in RUSI, so I'm going to mention it. The Met direction. I won't go through it in great detail. But with our three main priorities. Firstly, focusing on what really matters most to Londoners, that is violent crime at the moment. Secondly, mobilising our public and our partners, people like you, encouraging more active citizenship. And thirdly, achieving better outcomes in relation to justice, bringing people to justice and in support of victims. And we have four enabling priorities, of which I'll just mention two. Firstly, we want to be recognised as a responsible, exemplary and ethical organisation. And secondly, we've set out to seize the opportunities of data and digital tech to become a world leader in policing in that way also. This last, seizing the opportunities of digital and tech, has been very important to me during my commissionership. I said to the team when I arrived, we've got to improve dramatically the Met's ability to work in the digital age. And so violence is our number one operational priority, and transforming for the digital age is our number one corporate priority. So I'm going to move on now to speak about how tech is enabling human policing and why I say to you this needs your support. On your way here, I bet most of you will have accessed social media. Some of you will have used mapping tools. Many of you, perhaps even Google Translation, dare I mention it, certainly voice recognition and perhaps facial recognition on your phone if you needed to open it or to reset a bank account or something like that. Peel said, the police are the public and the public are the police. I strongly believe it holds true today. The police should have access to the same modern tools that the public have. Those will help us to do the job that is expected of us. Criminals make powerful use of the digital world. Obviously, we need to use cutting-edge tech too as a force for good. And for any police chief nowadays, the challenge in the data age is to make tech and data more of an advantage to us than it is to the criminal. But as Andrew Parker, DG of MI5, said recently, technology will never replace our need also to have human insight. And I would add to that in a policing context, technology will never, I can't imagine when, it will be able to replace the human police person's empathy, humanity, imagination, or ability to collaborate. Cast your mind back to Tony. If I took you out with Tony, you would see not only somebody who can make you feel like you're sitting in an armchair while he drives you around London at unfeasible speeds, but somebody who, as soon as he gets out of the vehicle, is kind and compassionate to a victim, or indeed to a young lad who's done something daft, who's at risk of getting into criminality. You would see the highest level of teamwork, an amazing depth of local knowledge about how the streets work, how this person works, how those group of people are going to work together. This cannot be done, in my view, by machines. And so policing will remain an essentially human service, full of good, highly motivated, thoughtful people, supported, of course, by better information and tools. And I was wondering about this point the other day, and I met some colleagues, some here, I think, from the Alan Turing Institute, and I was really pleased to hear them tell me how the idea of terminators and robots thinking like humans really is very, 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 very far off from anywhere we can currently imagine. So I would talk, in line with many other people, about augmented intelligence. I wouldn't put all policing's hopes and fears on what is described as artificial intelligence. Augmented intelligence, where one definition, human-centered partnership model of people and artificial intelligence working together to enhance cognitive performance, including learning, decision-making, and new experiences. This term describes better how technology can work to improve human intelligence rather than to replace it. And I think that feels much closer to how we in policing are using technology. And I also believe a license to operate technology in those human terms feels much closer to what the public would expect and accept. In any case, the Data Protection Act 2018 requires that automated decisions that affect individuals must have a human in the loop to oversee the decisions and really oversee the decisions and the processes behind them. That points to tools that are there to aid police officers rather than replace them, to augment their decision-making rather than to take the final decision for them. As data volumes grow and tech applications improve, we will be increasingly and rightly challenged to ensure we are using information correctly, and forces will need to work to ensure the public remains supportive of our approach. But technology gives us incredible opportunities in 2020 and beyond to identify more offenders, to locate fugitives and missing people, prove associations and motivations. One way I think we can build support and trust is by showing how we've introduced and used an armory of tools in the past that now help the police. So if we start with fingerprinting, DNA, and wider forensics, for all three, when they were introduced, there were concerns from some. Look at the impact they have now. All those technical innovations found their basis in common law for initial police usage. CCTV. I'm old enough to remember when CCTV was introduced. I can remember many of the concerns. Look at the way it helps us now prevent and investigate crime. The only question I'm ever asked about CCTV is why can't I have more in my street around my school to help me? Body-worn video. There were some concerns at its introduction. It's been a great success. Rolled out in the Met on time, to budget, a tough and easy to use bit of kit. It serves multiple purposes. Gathering evidence in, for example, a violent incident in a home or a disorder. That evidence has integrity, it's secure, it can be uploaded, accessed, and transferred to the CPS and the court very easily. It has increased officer and public confidence. It's reduced complaints. It's improved standards of evidence. It's also a great tool for learning. So it contributes to evidence, trust, legitimacy, and organisational improvement. And in recent years, we've adopted all kinds of, I think, mainly less controversial innovations. The public can access us digitally to ask questions or report crimes. The Met gives public information, and our neighbourhood officers communicate with local groups through a whole variety of social media platforms. Our 30,000 tablets and laptops makes life easier, safer, and faster for our officers and allows them to work flexibly and spend more time on the streets. Our mobile fingerprint device, likewise, allows them to deal swiftly with suspects for minor infringements without needing to arrest them, as well as identify people wanted for more serious matters. Better analytics give them improved intelligence. Faster DNA and drugs analysis allows improved identification and much faster processing of violent offenders. Tracking of serious offenders who are tagged, of suspect vehicles, of mobile devices are fundamental tools for covert investigations. And we are already using data and tools that apply rules-based algorithms to augment and speed up decision-making. Just as the legal sector is starting to use AI to prepare contracts and help manage documents during litigation, or the health sector looking at how machine learning combined with a human decision maker can improve the chances of detecting cancer. For example, there are now over 300 languages spoken in London, so we're exploring, as you would expect us to, machine translation tools to translate and triage seized media in a foreign language. We're looking at speech analytics software to help identify high harm, high risk, or threat calls to the police. We're beginning to use virtual and augmented reality to improve training. During recruitment, information is tailored for candidates using programmatic AI. They can engage with chatbots. During this calendar year, our recruitment partner, SSCL and the Met, are likely to introduce AI across many of our recruitment processes. I would argue that most areas in which we're already using what would be described as very modern technologies are largely controversial to the public. So let me turn now to live facial recognition. Let me try to bust some of the current and apparently pervasive myths about the Met's use of live facial recognition. The tech we are using does not, repeat, not store your biometric data. Human officers will always make the final decisions on whether or not to intervene, not the machine. Surveys tell us the public support its use for serious crime. The tech we are deploying is proven not to have an ethnic bias. And we've been completely open and transparent about it. Check out our website. Its use is very, very clearly signposted. So this is about using a tool that can augment intelligence rather than replace it. The Met's initial trials of LFR resulted in the arrest of 8 wanted individuals whom we would otherwise have been very unlikely to identify. Without LFR, those individuals would probably perhaps carried on causing further harm, and they probably wouldn't have been arrested, certainly not in the short or medium term. So I and others have been making the case for the proportionate use of tech in policing. But right now, the loudest voices in the debate seem to be the critics. Sometimes highly inaccurate and/or highly ill-informed. And I would say it is for the critics to justify to victims of crimes why police shouldn't use tech lawfully and proportionately to catch criminals. It's not for me and the police to decide where the boundary lies between security and privacy. I do think it's right for us to contribute to that debate, but it's obviously not for us to decide. But speaking as a member of the public, I'll be frank. In an age of Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, concern about my image and that of my fellow law-abiding citizens passing through LFR and not being stored feels much, much smaller than my and the public's vital expectation to be kept safe from a knife through the chest. And if, as seems likely, algorithms can assist in identifying patterns of behavior by those under authorized surveillance that would otherwise have been missed, patterns that indicate they are radicalizing others or are likely to mount a terrorist attack. If an algorithm can help identify in our criminal intelligence systems a potential serial rapist or killer that we could not have found by human endeavor alone, if a machine can improve our ability to disclose fairly, then I think almost all citizens would want us to use it. The only people who benefit from us not using lawfully and proportionately technology are the criminals, the rapists, the terrorists, and all those who want to harm you, your family, and friends. So with LFR, we are taking a small step to use emerging technology to support our efforts against violent crime. We're deploying it in a proportionate and limited way, storing no biometric data. We believe this has the support of the public, and we also believe that it has a very strong legal basis. We know there are some cheap algorithms that do have ethnic bias, but as I've said, ours doesn't. And currently, the only bias in it is that shows that it is slightly harder to identify a wanted woman than a wanted man. It's important for people to know that the only people we have on the LFR watch list are people wanted for serious crime. And as I've said, I think the surveys show, I know there's more work to come, but that's very likely to be supported by the public. And I'll quote somebody else in this room who said to me, sometimes you don't know what the public will support until you try. And that must actually be true. As the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation said in a report last year, the use of algorithms has the potential to improve the quality of decision making by increasing speed and accuracy with which decisions are made. It seems to me that we have two possible choices. We cannot adapt to modern technology and not use the technology that increases the likelihood of solving and preventing crime, and the public can continue to be rightly indignant that we haven't solved and prevented this or that crime. Or we can use tech proportionately to speed up how we, human officers, solve and prevent crime, and increase our chances of stopping the harm that we would be criticised for not stopping otherwise. I'm not, of course, arguing against criticism per se. As John Stuart Mill advised, truth emerges by exposing ideas and arguments to opposition and counterclaims or open debate. Ideas that face no competitors lack a way of proving their worth. What I would propose, therefore, is that the best way to ensure that the police use new and emerging tech in a way that has the country's support is for the government to bring in an enabling legislative framework that is debated through Parliament, consulted on in public, and which will outline the boundaries for how police should or should not use tech. I welcome, therefore, the government's commitment to empower the police to safely use new technologies like biometrics, AI, and the use of DNA within a strict legal framework. We are a law enforcement organisation. It is our duty to uphold the law. Give us the law, and we'll work within it. In the meantime, I and my colleagues will continue to take a keen interest in considering how best to use technology in an effective, ethical, and proportionate manner. That's why, like many of you, I've read a number of reports in preparation for today's speech, not least Lord Evans and his committee's recent very helpful report on AI and public standards, and the RUSI report we all have today. They highlight the lack of clear guidance and the need for a new set of frameworks. My team and I, along with wider policing colleagues at the national level, will consider carefully the report published today, and we will, of course, come back to RUSI with our thoughts on that. For today, I will simply say it will be crucial to ensure that any future governance is able to enable the proportionate and appropriate use of technology to augment human policing. Any future guidelines, and I know this is fiendishly difficult, but any future guidelines and governance need to be clear. They need to be simple. They need to be fit for the 21st century. They need not to go out of date as soon as they've been published. I strongly believe that if we in the UK can get this right, we stand in good stead to be world leaders in appropriate, proportionate, tech-enabled human policing. The Prime Minister announced in his speech to the UN last year that in 2020 he would host a summit in London to establish global tech guidelines with the UK as a, I quote, global leader in ethical and responsible technology. I hope that that might provide us with an opportunity to look at the use of tech in the round, including what it means for policing. So to conclude, we will use modern technology well and lawfully, but we remain a service of old-fashioned and timeless values such as integrity, compassion, courage. We will be primarily a human service, information and modern tech enabled where appropriate, but in a way that is acceptable to our citizens. Like many, many organisations, we have been using tools that apply locked-in algorithms in, I believe, uncontentious areas. Citizens and visitors expect modern policing in a modern country to use modern technology that intrudes as little as possible. With LFR, we're taking a small step to use emerging tech to support our efforts against violent crime. Trust is so important. It's a fundamental building block of good, legitimate policing. We must therefore inform the public, and we must build citizens' trust in law enforcement's use of tech. I'm asking for your help in that today. There needs to be a broad debate with people. People need to be able to inquire in a very transparent way about how tech is and could be used. It would be very helpful to have some kind of code of conduct for the use of tech in policing, a license to operate. We probably need a further assurance and inspection regime, not a whole new one, not a whole, with no, I don't want to be rude to anyone in the audience, but please, as John said, don't give us another regulator, but we may need a different, another regime. We propose that emerging and new technology, however it is used in policing, may well require the law to keep up and to change, of course. That needs to be debated. We all have a responsibility to prevent crime, as Peel said, a responsibility to support and ensure our police are properly equipped and enabled to adopt new practices at pace. And we all have a responsibility to ensure the police don't become too powerful or too intrusive. Our future effectiveness depends on us cherishing our core values, prizing our human interactions and our human decision-making, while embracing new technologies and making the most of the data we have, not drowning in it. So today I've spoken about some things about the demands on policing and the nature of crime and non-crime demand, a modern Met that is fit for the future, and how tech is enabling human policing, and why I think that needs your support. The modern Met is a force for good. It's a force you can trust. It's open to your scrutiny. We can't stand still and allow technology to advance while we're left behind. We need well-governed and well-explained, proper use of technology to reduce the chances of you and your family and friends being harmed by crime. We need modern tools for a modern police force that will help us keep you safe in these modern times. The Prime Minister has said recently, to keep our streets safe and cut crime, we need to give police the tools they need. Well, to finish with a quote, sort of, from one of his predecessors, Winston Churchill in 1941, give us the tools and we'll finish the job. People like Tony will cut violent crime, protect our public, and bring more serious violent offenders to justice. Thank you very much.
Put you here in the middle. Thank you very much, Commissioner, for a very thoughtful and nuanced and balanced set of remarks. And we all know how complicated this issue is, and trying to keep the police in the right place, keeping the public's trust. As you say, the UK police, I'm sure, does have so much more trust than so many other police forces around the world. So really appreciate that. We'll give you a bit of a rest for a moment and to gather your thoughts. And let me pose a few questions to each of our panelists. We're still on the record. And then I will open it up probably for the last 15, 20 minutes to the audience. So let me start with you, Lord Evans. Can you tell us a bit about your report and the recommendations from the Committee on Standards in Public Life, and in particular AI and public standards? So tell us a bit about what you did and what your summary, your conclusions were.
I'll start with a plug for RUSI, which is part of the reason that my committee went down the path of looking at AI and public standards was as a result of some of the early work that RUSI was doing in this area, which I think identified that if we are going to maintain the standards that we cherish and that we sort of base our public life on, then we need to consider how those work in the new technology environment, because I think there's no doubt that in all sorts of areas of public service, AI is going to be helping people to make decisions and to inform processes. So we need to make sure that in doing that, that we maintain our values and our standards as well. So that was the project that we decided to embark on. Our overall conclusion was very positive about the potential for technology. It seemed to us very clear that if we're going to have efficient services, making the best use of the information that's available to help the public, then AI is going to be part of that. And it also seemed to us that in standards terms, there was the potential, if this technology was used in the right way, that this would actually be a benefit, that it would be better in terms of ensuring that we don't fall into bias and so on. Humans are not perfect creatures in themselves, and therefore, if you get the technology right, it can help. But there are risks and there are vulnerabilities, and in particular, we identified in the report a number of areas where we felt that AI was a particular challenge in terms of openness, in terms of accountability, in terms of objectivity, and therefore we made a number of recommendations in those areas, and particularly that in introducing technology of this sort, we think it's extremely important that people are transparent about it and make it clear that this technology is being used, particularly in controversial areas. And that is not universally the case at the moment. It's very difficult to find out where government is and public services are using AI in some areas. Secondly, that there needs to be a very clear legal basis, which is made explicit for how this is being used and why. Thirdly, that there needs to be a thorough assessment of the impact of particular algorithms on things like civil liberties and human rights and freedoms. That there needs to be clear allocation of responsibility. You can't say, the computer made me do it. It's got to be a decision where somebody is answerable for it, and that is clearly stated in the way that the system is designed. There needs to be oversight of the system because these systems are not static. You can't do a sort of a process of quality assurance at the beginning and then leave it, because they are very often dynamic in themselves. And there needs to be appeal and redress, so that if you put those governance procedures around these technologies, then in our view you are more likely to be able to get the benefits without falling into the pitfalls. And we were not looking at specific uses and specific cases, but I was very encouraged when the live facial recognition work was being done, that this was being done in a very transparent way, that it was out there and able to be debated. And that sort of approach seems to me to be the approach that we need to take, because we're most likely to get this right if there is challenge and if there is discussion and transparency around it, and not all organisations are necessarily in that position. And just on the law enforcement side, I guess if we did have a reservation, it was that there is not a national kind of overlay of professional practice and so on that you would see, for instance, in the health services. So I guess, although we haven't looked at it, you're probably more likely to get that sort of process in a large and sort of well-managed force like the Met, but that one needs to be a little bit more careful about some of the uses which might be perhaps done with less transparency. And of course we need to think not just about the particular use in a circumstance, but also about the wider data environment in which AI systems are developed, and whether that is being done ethically in terms of the training data, etc., etc. So in our view there is potential here, but the regulatory and legal framework is still immature and needs to be taken forward.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. Roger, can you tell us a bit about the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation? I mean, it seems that the title says it all, but tell us a bit more about the remit and why it was established, and your own recent findings and concerns.
Well, it was set up very much with the sorts of issues that Cressida has just been talking about in mind, which is there is enormous potential benefit from the use of these technologies, but there is a real issue around trust and is the public supportive of this? Do they understand what is going on and will they back it? And I think it's fair to say that one of the things that often holds back the use of technology is not necessarily legal barriers or regulatory barriers, but just a fear of legitimacy and whether or not it is a legitimate thing to do. The CDEI was set up following a House of Lords report with a view, and again very much in line with the earlier comments, that we don't need another regulator. AI is a multi-purpose technology. It's going to be there in finance, it's going to be there in HR, it's going to be there in every aspect of life, healthcare and policing. But there is, however, a need to think cross-sectorally about the implications here. Our remit is to maximise the benefit of AI for society, and what our task is to advise government in terms of policy, in terms of regulatory gaps, and indeed in terms of sort of missed opportunities, and how can government policy support the beneficial use of AI, and how can we bring together different elements of society, from civil society, the media, and academia, to help support that. We're led by a multidisciplinary board in that respect, and some of whom are here. So, for example, Glenys Stacey with huge expertise in regulation, Stephen Croft, the Bishop of Oxford, bringing a community and faith-based approach to some of the issues, Edwina, who's worked in the data industry and knows firsthand just how incredibly powerful data can be to uncover and discover ways to help people or understand their needs. So we have a multidisciplinary board. We have also academics and others from industry on that board. We're a team of about 25 at the moment, and we've started looking at very specific policy issues. Our first piece of work was on micro-targeting, and I think it sort of set the theme. It was published a couple of weeks ago, and we did a large piece of public engagement work around the country, and what came out of that was, as we explained in detail, and as you were saying earlier, often people don't really understand the truth about these technologies, and we explained how the system worked, and people were at first kind of horrified. I mean, they really loved all the tools. They're going, these are fantastic, and then we explained how it worked, and there was a general sense of horror. And then there was a sort of a reflection and a sense that, well, I still want the good stuff here. I want this technology to be used in the way that it is beneficial, but I do want something to be done about the misleading information that is being promoted by recommendation engines, or the fact that malicious actors from foreign states can use these technologies to distribute harmful material. Do something about that, but don't stop us from benefiting from these technologies while you do that. And the next piece of work, which really led to the commissioning of this report with RUSI, is to look at algorithmic bias. And we are looking at it in a range of sectors. We're looking at it in terms of recruitment, we're looking at it in terms of credit, but we are also looking at it in terms of the use of algorithms in policing, which is obviously an area of concern. And the aim here is, again, to identify what are the risks, what are the benefits, and how do we communicate effectively to the public? How do we firstly establish what good governance looks like? That's the first step, but secondly, then how do we also communicate to the public so that they trust and understand that this is being well governed and used for their benefit?
Great. Well, thank you for that. Let's go to Sasha now. Tell us a bit, just maybe some of the key conclusions, because I don't think everyone's had a chance to read through this while sitting here and listening to these great remarks. So tell us a few of the key findings from our paper, Sasha.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Commissioner, for those incisive and thought-provoking comments. So for this project, we consulted widely across the UK policing community. We met with senior police officers, government officials, legal experts, academics, technology companies, and others, many of whom are in the room. So thank you very much for contributing to the research. We were trying to understand, first of all, how this technology was being used nationwide, and secondly, what policies and processes were in place to govern that use, and then to make recommendations about where the gaps were in existing policy frameworks relating to police use of technology. Now, while recent discussion has focused on facial recognition, algorithms are now actually being used for a wide variety of policing purposes, many of which are probably uncontroversial. But machine learning, AI, is being used to forecast demand in control rooms, assess individuals' risk of reoffending, predict where crime is most likely to happen in the near future, triage crimes according to their perceived solvability. So there's a really wide spectrum of applications here. And one of the most consistent comments that we were getting from police officers that were in charge of managing these programs is that in the absence of any clear national guidelines about how police forces should develop and implement these tools, they've had to develop their own force-level policies and guidance. And there is a concern that in the absence of a clear national framework, the fear of falling on the wrong side of the ethical divide may impede the use of new, improved, but often experimental methods, technologies which are routinely used in the private sector, which many people will use every day just as part of your normal life. But for very good reasons, the police have higher levels of accountability, scrutiny, that need to be met before they can implement these tools in an operational environment. Now, we found that in many cases, the use of improved and more sophisticated algorithmic tools is being driven by a perceived need to allocate limited resources to where they're most needed. And when used effectively, there's no doubt that this technology can assist the police to more efficiently manage risk and demand by prioritising their resources to the areas of greatest need. But AI is not without risks, and particularly when insights are being derived at the individual sort of person level, when you're using personal data to predict future behaviour or risk score offenders according to their perceived probability of future offending. That raises a number of human rights, data protection issues that need to be taken into account. And we were very pleased to see when the Met Police announced that they were going to be rolling out facial recognition operationally, that all of those impact assessments had been conducted and published on the Met Police's website. And one of the recommendations of our report is that at the outset of any new police technology project of this kind, there should be a requirement for an integrated impact assessment to assess the potential impact of the project on individuals with protected characteristics, for instance, or to assess risk of bias and discrimination. Now, as Roger mentioned, this project is part of the CDEI's wider review into bias and algorithmic decision-making. So we looked in detail at the issue of bias and discrimination in police algorithms. And there's a lot of sort of misconceptions or misunderstandings about the issue of algorithmic bias, as it's often called. And actually, we found no evidence to indicate that any of the algorithms currently in use in policing today in England and Wales show any sign of unfair discrimination. The research that has been conducted is based in the US, and it's unclear whether any of those concerns are transferable to the UK context. But also, it's probably too early to say, given that the use of predictive policing is still in quite an early stage in the UK, whether these concerns actually play out in practice. So I think we need to be careful that we don't jump the gun here and sort of assume that these concerns are actually going to materialise. So I wouldn't be a researcher if I didn't say that more research was needed to assess to assess the extent to which bias in predictive policing occurs in practice. I'll also mention that all of the tools that we looked at were being used to augment and not replace human decision-making. And actually, we found that in most cases, because the police are trained to accept nothing and challenge everything, they were more likely to challenge the algorithmic prediction and question why it had arrived at a certain output. So it doesn't look like there's a real risk of fettering the discretion of human officers if the tools are used in this way. This is all to say that there needs to be clearer national guidance to enable the police to innovate in a controlled way and maximise the clear potential benefits of these technologies, but while keeping under control all of those risks and issues that aren't necessarily accounted for within the statutory legal regime. Whether new legislation is needed to govern particular aspects of police technology, that will take time. And frankly, we can't wait for legislation to pass through Parliament. So concerted action is needed on the part of government in the absence of any clear primary legislation to develop a new policy framework and new national guidance to enable police forces to innovate for the digital age. And the project the ongoing project with the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation will hopefully help to fill that gap.
Great. Well, thank you, Sasha. Commissioner, let me ask you a question about skills, expertise, training. I know it's an issue you care a lot about. And how do you, I know the military and other, it's not just the police that wrestle with this, but to bring in the right type of expertise to help make sure that you're doing it properly, to give maybe the older generation, and I'm including myself, of course, in this, the comfort, because not all of us are comfortable with these new technologies. You know, how do you wrestle with that when you're a force of people that are out on the beat, walking around, talking to people all the time? How do you square that?
Well, I guess the whole issue of skills for the digital age is huge in all organisations. I meet regularly with people in all sorts of different sectors, and they're all saying this is, a massive challenge for us, both to reskill and re-educate our current workforce, and secondly, to attract the particular talents we might need for high-end work. So, we have, I think, a fantastic set of people who have been delivering for us in a way that I've never seen in policing before over the last couple of years. Some really, really, really good, workable, resilient, safe, proper tools that our officers can then use safely and well. But that takes a lot, and we've had to, completely change the way we approach that. And if I was to go out on the street, let's be frank, last night, wrestling with formatting and things, my partner was laughing about me yet again doing a speech about technology and policing. We have a lot of hugely experienced and capable people who need further confidence and upskilling, to be sure. They may be the ones who are often challenging. Well, why? I don't, until somebody shows. The police people know their business, and they, as you say, they challenge everything, and they need to be assured. And so, we, in common with, as part of the national, there is a lot of national work going on. I appreciate the comments that have been made about we don't yet have the right policy framework, and we don't yet have sufficient coherent practice about. There's been a lot of national work going on data ethics, on digital skills, on the digital strategies for all of policing. And part of that is about upskilling our people so they feel confident to use, in every way confident. They know how it will get the best effect for them, but they know that they are not going to be doing something unethical or illegal by using it. And that is a big challenge.
Okay, great. Let me ask you one more question and then probably open it up to the rest of you. A related issue is, we all know that China is probably the lead user in using facial recognition technologies without respecting civil liberties and individual rights. But they're, hoovering up so much information. They're selling their technology globally. What countries do you know of that do this on the other end, that aspire to be successful as the UK is trying to be, or where would you rank the UK compared to other countries in Europe or transatlantic, Canada, US, Australia? Does anyone have any information about that? Who are the best in maintaining this balance?
I'm the least well qualified to say, but I'll kick off so the others don't go quiet. A really broad generalization that I read the other day, sort of advice to global companies or companies operating in lots of different environments, was there are some countries where data is regarded as something to be commercialized. There are some where it's regarded as something to be exploited to the hilt, bar nothing. And there are some where it's regarded as primarily something to be protected. And I think the UK need to be obviously in the protection business, but absolutely in the proper exploitation business. And reading some of the material I've read recently, it's clear that some of our European, particularly Northern European countries, are in a good place to be able to also, I think, take steps forward in this. Particularly probably some of the smaller countries, interestingly.
Yeah. Please, Lord Evans.
We didn't do a sort of comprehensive survey of practice globally, but we did obviously look as much as we could at the literature and the various sets of guidance and so on that are out there. I mean, I think from a UK perspective, I thought that was quite an encouraging process, because I think there is a lot of thought going on in the UK. I think government have taken a serious interest in this, and although our systems are still relatively emergent, you know, compared with many countries, we're in a good place. I think, you know, the Canadians have gone down a particular route. All these things are very context specific. The Singaporeans are doing a lot of really interesting thought, but their political system isn't quite the same as ours, and we're probably not going to end up in quite the same place. But there's a very, you know, useful dialogue going on with Singapore on these issues. So on the whole, I think the UK is at least up with best practice on thinking about these things, both as an opportunity, but also as an area where we need to get the vulnerabilities managed so that we can get the benefits.
Yeah. Roger or Sasha, anything to add? Or?
No, I would agree with that. I think, you know, I think in terms of the rollouts by the piloting by the Met in South Wales with independent academic review of it being tested in the courts, these are all show that there is a degree of governance. As the report makes clear, there are gaps that need to be filled, and we need to address that. I think the other thing, the other kind of context that's worth bearing in mind internationally, is just building public trust and making sure, and it's either the differentials in public trust, while there is public support for this, it does diminish as you move towards younger people, minority communities. We have lower levels of trust there. We need to think really hard about how we get the highest levels of trust across the board.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let me open it up. I know we have a lot of experts in the room, and I apologize to people behind the podium, sightline over here, but let's